Hello, it's new motivate story. Let's get started.
Elliot Gray had always been an ambitious man, at least in his mind. He dreamt of writing a best-selling novel, mastering the piano, and sculpting his body into peak condition. But every time he tried to start, something held him back. A weight heavier than stone pressed him into his couch. A fog of exhaustion clouded his mind, even when he had done nothing all day. Laziness wasn't just a bad habit for Elliot, it was an enemy. And no matter how many motivational books he read, how many productivity hacks he tried, he always found himself slipping back into its suffocating grasp. Then, one night, everything changed. It started as a dream. At least, he thought it was a dream. Elliot woke up in a dark, cavernous space, an eerie blue mist swirling around him. A voice echoed in the emptiness, deep and mocking. "Mortal, you dare defy me." Elliot turned, his heart pounding. A figure emerged from the mist, a monstrous entity with a bloated, sluggish body draped in tattered robes. Its eyes glowed dimly, like dying embers, and its voice dripped with contempt. "I am Sloth, the eternal slumber. You have been my servant for years. Why do you now seek to break free?" Elliot swallowed hard. I just want to do something with my life." Sloth chuckled, a slow, rattling sound. "You cannot escape me. I am in your bones, in your blood. You will always return to me." "No," Elliot whispered, fist clenching. "Not this time." Sloth grinned, revealing rows of yellowed, cracked teeth. "Then prove it." The cavern shifted, and Elliot found himself standing on a vast battlefield. The sky churned with storm clouds, and strange, twisted creatures crawled from the shadows. His laziness had taken form. From the depths emerged hunched beings with sagging skin, drooping eyes, and sluggish movements. His old habits made manifest. They were procrastination, distraction, excuse, and doubt. Sloth loomed behind them. If you can defeat them, you are free. If you fail, you will sleep forever. Elliot had no choice. He clenched his fists. The battle against laziness had begun. The first enemy lurched forward, a grotesque being with a melted clock for a face, its arms stretched like rubber bands, always pulling away from action. Procrastination. Later, the creature whispered, its voice soothing, almost hypnotic. "You can start tomorrow. You're tired today." Elliot felt its pull. The warmth of inaction, the illusion of time stretching infinitely ahead. But something within him snapped. "No," he said firmly. "I start now." A sword materialized in his hand, a blade pulsing with golden energy. The sword of action. He swung it, slicing through procrastination's rubbery arms. The creature shrieked, writhing before collapsing into dust. Sloth chuckled. "A lucky strike. But can you resist the next?" The battlefield twisted into a maze of flashing screens, buzzing notifications, and endless temptations. Elliot barely had time to react before a creature with hundreds of twitching fingers leapt at him. Distraction. It whispered in 1,000 voices. "Check your phone. Watch one more video. Scroll for 5 more minutes." Elliot felt his resolve waver. His feet slowed. The maze pulled him in. Then he remembered something. Momentum matters more than motivation. He gritted his teeth and pressed forward, using the shield of focus, a shimmering barrier that deflected the whispers. With each step, the screen shattered. The voices faded. Distraction screamed as the shield crushed it, and Elliot burst free from the maze, panting. Sloth's grin faded. "You're stronger than I thought, but you still have doubts." As the dust from the last battle settled, the battlefield began to warp again, shifting into a cold, desolate wasteland. The winds howled, carrying with them a sense of doom. From the shadows emerged a towering figure draped in flowing robes, its face obscured by a large, golden mask. Excuse. It moved with a confident, almost serene gait, as if it were untouchable, unmovable. Its voice boomed in a calm, soothing tone. "Why push yourself? You deserve rest. Life is hard. Take a break, and tomorrow will be better." Elliot could feel it. The weight of the words wrapped around his mind, like an invisible chain pulling him down. He had heard these words countless times before. "You're too tired. Maybe you'll do it later. It's okay to take a day off. You don't need to try today." The temptation was enormous. It would be so easy to succumb, to fall back into the warm embrace of excuses and comfort. But Elliot was no longer the same person he had been when he first entered this war. No, Elliot muttered, shaking his head. I've made it this far. I will not turn back. Excuse's golden mask seemed to shimmer, mocking him. You always say that, but you always give in. What's one more day? What's one more break? You know what happens. Elliot's mind raced. It was true. He had failed before. He had let the excuses win time and time again. But this time, he wasn't going to let it happen. Elliot reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out the stone of resolve, a smooth, black rock that seemed to pulse with determination. It glowed faintly, a symbol of his newfound strength. With a roar, he hurled the stone of resolve at the towering figure of excuse. The stone hit with a crack, and the force of its impact shattered the mask, revealing a face filled with apathy and weariness. The figure shrieked, disintegrating into a cloud of smoke. Elliot's heart pounded, but he stood tall, the weight of past failures no longer chaining him. Sloth's laughter echoed across the battlefield. You've done well so far, mortal, but there's still one more. One more enemy you must face. Elliot's gaze hardened. He was ready. He had come too far to fail now. The battlefield shifted once again, this time into a foggy valley filled with whispering shadows. In the distance, a figure stood, tall and imposing, its outline barely visible in the mist. Doubt. The figure was silent at first, but its presence was overwhelming. The air seemed to thicken, and the world felt smaller, tighter. Doubt spoke, and its voice was like a low murmur, just loud enough to sink deep into Elliot's mind. You don't deserve success. You'll never be good enough. What if you fail again? What if you've been lying to yourself all this time? You'll never achieve your goals. Elliot froze. The whispers were like daggers, each one piercing his heart. He had heard them so many times. You're not smart enough. You're too lazy to be great. Who are you kidding? Just give up. He felt the weight of these thoughts crush him. He had struggled so much, failed so many times, and yet he kept pushing forward. But what if this time was different? What if he really couldn't do it? But then, as if on instinct, Elliot gripped his sword tightly and lifted his chin. No, he said, his voice trembling but firm. I won't listen to you. I've made it this far. And even if I fail, I'll learn from it. I won't give up. Doubt's form began to shift, its shadows twisting and turning like an ever-changing mass of uncertainty. It tried to consume him, to drown him in its fog of negativity. But Elliot didn't back down. He raised the torch of confidence, a brilliant flame that burned with the light of his determination and swung it high above his head. The fog shrieked as the flame pushed it back, illuminating the path ahead. For the first time in the battle, the whispers began to fade. Doubt recoiled, its form flickering like a dying ember. With one final cry, the shadowy figure collapsed, disintegrating into nothingness. The battlefield was silent. Elliot stood, breathing heavily, his sword in hand and the torch of confidence flickering beside him. He had defeated the 4 enemies: procrastination, distraction, excuse, and doubt. But the weight of the battle still lingered in his chest. You've done well, mortal, Sloth's voice echoed. But do you really think the fight is over? Elliot felt a shiver run down his spine. He had won the battle, but was the war truly over? Was laziness truly defeated? Sloth's form reappeared, larger than before, its presence overwhelming. I am the embodiment of the eternal slumber, the force that will always whisper, always pull you back. Can you really escape me forever? Elliot stood tall, his mind clear. Yes. For the first time, he understood. Laziness wasn't something that could be destroyed in one battle. It wasn't an enemy that could be vanquished once and for all. It was a constant, a challenge that would always rise again. But it was also something that could be overcome, day by day, choice by choice. I will always fight you, Elliot said, his voice unwavering. Because I am stronger than my weaknesses. Sloth's form began to shrink, its power fading as it retreated. You may have won this time, mortal, but I will always be waiting. With a final, mocking laugh, the figure disappeared, leaving Elliot standing alone in the silence of the battlefield. He wasn't finished. The war wasn't over. But he had learned the most important lesson of all. The best way to beat laziness is simply to show up. The battlefield had vanished, and Elliot found himself standing in the middle of his apartment, the glow of the morning sun filtering through the curtains. The remnants of the dream, or perhaps it had been something more, lingered in his mind, vivid and clear. He could feel the weight of his struggles, but the heaviness had lessened. The battle against laziness had taken on a new shape. For days, Elliot had lived with the quiet knowledge that he was constantly fighting against his own inertia, but the dream had shifted something in him. He understood now that laziness wasn't a force that could be permanently vanquished, but a daily struggle, one that required vigilance and self-awareness. The first step was simple. Elliot stood and walked to his desk, where a pile of papers had accumulated, reminders of all the things he had procrastinated on for weeks. His novel, a long-forgotten manuscript buried under notes and ideas. His workout routine, which had turned into an ideal rather than a reality. The piano, gathering dust in the corner of the room. But instead of falling into the trap of feeling overwhelmed by all the unfinished tasks, Elliot focused on what he could do now. He sat down at his desk and picked up the first sheet of paper, the one with the most basic of notes for his novel. Write 500 words. That was all he needed to focus on. Not the entire book, not the grand plan of finishing it. Just 500 words. He set a timer for 25 minutes, a method he had once scoffed at, the Pomodoro technique, but it felt different now. It was no longer about pushing through everything at once. It was about making progress, bit by bit. The clock ticked down as he typed, his fingers stumbling at first, but soon gaining momentum. He wasn't looking for perfection, just for action. When the timer rang, Elliot paused. He had written 650 words, and even though they were rough and unpolished, it felt like a victory. Not because the words were perfect, but because he had taken action. He smiled to himself. He had started the day with a simple choice: to overcome inertia, to defeat the weight of laziness with one small step. As the days passed, Elliot continued his journey, each day a battle in its own right. He realized that the quest to overcome laziness wasn't about waiting for the mythical feeling of motivation to strike. Motivation, he discovered, was often fleeting and unpredictable. It was more about the quiet persistence of action. He no longer waited for the inspiration to write or the energy to work out. Instead, he showed up every day, regardless of how he felt. Even on the days when the fog of fatigue clouded his mind, when his bed felt more inviting than the gym, he pushed himself to move forward. Some days, it was a small victory, a single paragraph written or a single set completed at the gym. Other days, it was a larger win, finishing an entire chapter or running a full 5 miles. The key was consistency, and with each passing day, he began to understand that the most important thing was to start. The first step was always the hardest, but once he took it, momentum would carry him forward. He found the greatest strength in acknowledging that laziness wasn't something that could be eradicated forever. It was a part of being human. But every day, he could choose to push back against it. As Elliot continued to confront his laziness, he realized that he wasn't alone in his struggle. He reached out to his friends, some of whom had experienced similar battles, and shared what he had learned. In turn, they shared their own strategies and struggles. There was Jason, a childhood friend, who had once been notorious for his procrastination. He had always been the one who talked about his plans, but never took action. Yet now, he had started running every morning, telling Elliot that it was the small daily steps, one foot in front of the other, that helped him break free from his cycle of inaction. Then there was Maya, a colleague from work, who had struggled with balancing her career and health. Her secret, she revealed, was that she had stopped waiting for the perfect moment to go to the gym. Instead, she went for 20 minutes every day, no matter how busy her schedule. It wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up. Elliot's friends became his allies in the war against laziness. They held each other accountable, celebrated small victories together, and shared their frustrations during the inevitable setbacks. This sense of community was invaluable. It was a reminder that he didn't have to face the battle alone. Despite the progress he had made, Elliot knew that the war against laziness would never truly end. There would always be days when the temptation to stay in bed would feel stronger than the pull of his goals. There would be times when the comfort of distractions would seem more inviting than the discomfort of work. But now, he understood something crucial. The struggle itself is the key. It was in the struggle that he found strength. It was in showing up, day after day, that he built momentum. And it was in fighting laziness, even when it seemed like an insurmountable enemy, that he discovered what he was truly capable of. He wasn't perfect. Some days, he still struggled, but he no longer saw those days as failures. Instead, he viewed them as part of the journey. Because in the end, it wasn't about never being lazy. It was about the ability to rise again after each fall, to keep going when the temptation to stop seemed so strong. Elliot had learned that the real key to beating laziness was not a one-time victory. It was the commitment to never stop fighting, to continue making choices that aligned with his goals, even when the path was difficult or unclear. Years later, as Elliot sat at his desk, writing the final words of his novel, he looked back on the journey. It had been long, filled with setbacks, small victories, and moments of doubt. But in the end, he had learned to conquer laziness, not by eradicating it, but by learning how to face it head-on each day. He had beaten it, not with one final blow, but with 1,000 small acts of persistence. And as he closed his laptop and stood up, he felt something that had once seemed elusive, the quiet satisfaction of progress. The battle was ongoing. But for now, at least, laziness had been beaten for today.